All right, Downers, welcome to the podcast. My guest today is none other than Kris Crummett. Kris is a producer, engineer, mastering guy, mixing guy in Portland, Oregon. He's done a ton of records, most recently, the biggest deal, Dance Gavin Dance, number 13 on the Billboard charts. He's done a ton of stuff for Rise Records, same time zone as me, very nearby. I'm up in Seattle. He's down there in Portland. And he's a producer, guys, had a ton of success, been doing stuff since about 2002. So we're going to talk today about his career, recording, that type of thing. Kris, thank you for joining us very much.
Yeah, no problem. I'm stoked to be here, man.
You're somebody that a lot of Emery fans and people I know and the genre of music that I do are very interested in. And there's something about producers that just it's always interesting to people talk about. It's like a fantasy career, I think. People think of producers as they have this fantasy career. It's probably one of the most things that you could, kids probably aspire to be, and they just don't understand any pathway of how you become that. And so when there's somebody like you who makes a name for themselves, and they do one record and then the next, and they keep getting bigger and bigger, I think that's just such a weird fantasy. But from the inside of being a producer and an engineer, it's a tough industry for sure. It's been really difficult for a lot of people, and very, very, very few people succeed in it. So I'm glad to have you on to talk about that kind of stuff today.
Cool, yeah, man.
So night before Thanksgiving here, I'll tell you what, we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, but let me just unload where I'm at personally. Can I do that? That way you get to know me a little bit, and then I think you'll trust me a little more, and we'll have a better conversation since we don't know each other. Sure. I found out yesterday that my dog has cancer and is going to die, I think. That's a big deal. I got a newborn screaming baby at home, another daughter, a 3-year-old at home. Is difficult. I'm having 12 people over tomorrow for Thanksgiving. And then just before I left to come here, my mother-in-law called me and asked me could I take her to the emergency room because she was having something wrong with her. So I feel pretty lucky just to be here tonight. But I think she's okay. I dropped her off, and after this podcast, I'm going to go back and check on her, maybe pick her up from the ER. So that's my weekend. That's where I'm coming at for
Don't maybe pick her up. You might want to for sure.
Well, I mean, she could take an Uber or something, right? She could take. There's Ubers, cabs. She'll be fine, right?
That's true.
But how about you? What are you looking at for the holiday and your work schedule and stuff like that?
Oh man, I'm in a similar boat, maybe slightly less depressing. I don't have a dog at all, so. But I do have a 10-month-old, and this is like our first Thanksgiving. We're having a bunch of people over too, and this is our first Thanksgiving with him. And just trying to, man, our house is a mess because my studio was in there for a while, and it's like I'm going through the realization that there's still half of it in there, trying to get it out and doing tons of work at the same time. And having a little boy is like crazy. I've not spent much time around kids, and it's amazing, but it takes up a lot of time, and there's all these things that you don't realize. It's like, I'm just going to clean the house. It's like, no, you're not just going to clean the house. You're going to clean the house with one hand, and if you're lucky to bend over and not break your back while holding it.
Yeah, I saw that you had kids. So this is your first kid, and it's a 10-month-old boy.
It is, yeah, it is.
Well, congratulations, Kris, on that. I'm new to. I'm a little bit older, but I'm new to kids. I'm 37 years old, and I have a 3.5-year-old and a newborn. But how old are you?
I'm 34.
34.
So probably around the same age. I just turned 34 like 2 days ago.
That's great. So crazy. That's a really good place to start. So let's talk about this. Let's go in this personal angle here for a little bit. How does it work for you? How in the world? One of the things that I've had the most struggle with whenever I'm doing engineering, recording for other people or myself is the hours and the schedule you keep and how it relates to your family. I always have found that, and I do less of it now, do more podcasting and stuff like that. But especially with engineering, when you have bands in town, you have people from out of town, they're staying, they're in hotels, and they want to work every single hour of the day a lot of times. How do you find that balance? Is that a difficult thing for you or not?
Well, it's something I kind of prepared for because I knew, it definitely changes when you have a kid. But before that, I spent a lot of years being terrible at it and just working all the time and not spending enough time with my family. And it became pretty obvious over the years, as it does for probably any engineer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like you got to make a change, or you're probably going to end up divorced or something. Like,
yeah,
you know, it's tough. But so like my planning, I think, helped out a lot. About a year and a half ago, I hired like a full-time engineer. So I do like 8 to 10 hours with the band during the day, and then my engineer he'll either come in early and work before if I'm working later, or he'll work later. And so we can do super long days, and all the stuff that like needs me here and needs to be worked out, I'm here for. And then, you know, when you're doubling rhythm guitars in the chorus, you're doing that with my engineer, you know, after I leave. So we're super productive, and it helps a lot. I mean, I'm still gone a lot, but
what do you do hours wise? What you say you really do 8 or 10 hours 5 days a week when you have a band in the middle of a project?
Yeah.
What hours do you do there?
More 8s than 10s. I'm usually like 10 a.m. to 6.
That's good.
10 a.m. to 8.
And so let's
it works pretty well. The studio is also, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
But the studio is also on my property. So it's like I bought a pretty large property here in Portland where I built a studio on the back end of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it also makes it easier. There's no commute time, and like if I need to take a lunch or if I need to do something, I can just go into the house, and it you know, makes life a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, you know, you've got two really good solutions there because of and I think those things are recent for you, that you've had the engineer and you have your new studio. So based on your work, your drive, what you've put in, now you've been able to make those two decisions and choices, have been able to afford them. You're fortunate enough to do that. But I bet the last decade was not that way. It was probably where you know, did you have the problem where you'd sit there and work all night and not go home and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, man. Dude,
because
absolutely.
how else can you do it? I mean,
I did that for years. I even there was a point in my life where I just like, I was living with someone and I moved out, and then I would just basically I wasn't even living anywhere, but I was working so much that it didn't matter, you know?
Yeah.
Like, but that was a long time ago. But,
that's common for engineers.
You work so much that sometimes, you're just there all the time.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because engineers and audio people, they like it so much that they don't feel, it's not like working at a factory. I mean, it's very easy to get lost. Yeah. And the thing I always found is my wife, I'd call her and say, okay, I'm going to edit some drum tracks and do this thing, and I'll be home and I would say amount of time, and it was always double the amount of time. So I tried to start factoring in that I would just double quote whatever estimated time I thought it would be. But you get lost in the stuff, and you really do enjoy it, especially the people that are good at it. I saw on Facebook, I think we have some mutual friends. Do you know the engineer Dan Corniff? Do you know Dan?
I do, yeah. I mixed a record that he produced. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a super awesome guy.
So I love Dan, and he did some stuff for us, and he's crazy. Like, he lives in his studio all the time, and he was working at the time that I went and did some stuff with him in New Jersey, and he lived on, like, Long Island, like the other side of Manhattan, and he would leave the studio every night at 11, 12, 1 in the morning, drive all the way home, an hour and a half, and his fiance was like a school teacher, and then he would have to get up the next day, and that was just it. But he has this... Like, he loved it. He would just sit there and do it forever. Yeah. And if you have an intern that's sitting there with you, it's just crazy that, you know, and you hear stories of engineers, they just get put through the ringer, like interns and new engineers. It's like, you want to do this. This is what it is. And when the lead producer or engineer, somebody like Dan, is doing those hours, like, how are you, you know, that.
Yeah, no one else is going to get out of it, right?
That's right. So nobody else, if the main guy's going to do it.
It's a test, though. I mean, that's a true test. Like, if you can't do those hours, if you don't have that mental stability to just be there all the time and be super focused on stuff, then you're probably going to have a tough time, like, making it in general on your own.
Yeah, it's some of the most brutal hours there can be, because the focus is that band. They literally paid tens of thousands of dollars, and they're out of town, and it's their, like, these bands that you're recording a lot. I don't know if you get the sense, but this is their whole life has been built up to this moment of making their first or second record. And I remember the first records we made, the intensity that I had toward the producer and the expectations that I had of him were unbelievable and probably unrealistic, as far as my whole life is riding on these next 3 weeks or 4 weeks that we're going to be here. Yeah. But he was just a person doing the same job he does every single week. And that can be a real difficult thing. I find that it can be, or always has been for me.
It's something that both sides have to keep in mind for sure. But it's really easy for producers, I think, sometimes to forget that this is it. This is like the next 2 years for this band or forever, you know?
Yeah.
It's always super important. And I always try to keep that in mind because I know every single record, like those people, that's everything they've been working for the prior year, and everything they're going to be doing for the next year or two is based around whatever we do in this like 3 weeks or 2 months. So it's important, but bands also have to remember that like we are doing this all the time. So it's almost better to like end 2 hours earlier and then be fresh tomorrow instead of me just being totally dead. And that was part of me hiring someone else, man, is I just like, I did like 12 years. There was like a 5-year span where I think I took 7 days off or something.
Crazy.
It was like, it was totally absurd, but I loved it. I never had a problem, but it does get to the point where like, you either got to bring someone else in or you got to figure out how to space out your time and be able to afford, bands have the same budgets, but spread out the time more because, you don't want to die, but you don't want to run yourself into the ground, but you also have to respect that bands have a lot to do and a lot to get done.
Well, let me focus in a little bit more specifically. What are the things that you feel is vital that you do while you're there versus your engineer could do? Because there's the opposite side of the thing we've spent the last few minutes talking about, and that is there's so many times and so many producers where you get to this level or this goofy thing, and I've encountered it before a few times, where the producer guy with the name that attracts you to the studio literally does almost nothing. Like he's just a guru that comes in and out, and you go, what the hell? The engineer does all the work here. So it doesn't sound like that's you, but how do you delineate, and what do you think about the people like that? That'd be like Howard Benson, David Bendith's a little bit that way. I'm sure Rick Rubin obviously doesn't put his hands on many knobs.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're talking about Rick Rubin, I think that's A-okay because that's what he does, and he has the budgets to hire engineers who are producers. He's putting together an awesome team. But I'm not Rick Rubin. I would love to be, maybe someday, but probably not. I could barely grow a beard till I was 30. I don't like that. I mean, I just couldn't operate that way because I don't think the record would end up how I wanted it. I don't feel like I could leave and come back and be like, oh yeah, I love all these takes. They're so awesome. It's like, no, like, let me do all the things that are up front, the things that are important. We're going to rewrite all these riffs, and then I know that this is exactly what you're going to do. So tonight you have 4 hours after I'm gone to do this, 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 and this that we've already planned out. And I already know. And part of, if that makes sense.
It does. But let's define this, like, and this. Like, what is the things that you must be there for?
So the things I must be there for, vocals always, unless it's like, sometimes I write harmonies in Melodyne and then people come back and sing them. If someone's doing that, my engineer can track that. But vocals for sure, lead guitars, drums. Most of the time I'm around. My engineer is really good with drums, and I always make sure of that. So as long as I know the parts and know exactly what's going to happen, that's fine. But I'm around for the bulk of stuff. And so really all he does is like doubling stuff, backup guitars. If the band wants to mess around with effects or feedback on something for 4 hours, you know what I mean? Sometimes there's times where a dude just wants to sit in here and run through like 12 different riffs on a part and mess around with it, but record it because he doesn't know if it'll ever be the same again. And stuff like that, that's cool. When I come back in the morning, I'm like, it's 90% cool and
you've been working on it.
And let's fix those little parts and stuff. It's just about how you delegate, and I try to do that. I know that's still kind of vague.
No, it's not. I was working on a record one time, and there was a really high maintenance band member, and all he ever wanted to talk about was effects and the possibilities that you could get out of it. He was a guitar player. He was not a good guitar player, and it was a Christian band that I was working on with Aaron Sprinkle in Seattle, and the guy was. He was just a super, super conservative, really aggressive guy with very little amount of talent. I'm not going to say who it is or anything, so I can talk bad about him.
Yeah, that's fine.
But he was so aggressive and unskilled, and he would just want to mess around forever. And I was like I just wanted to go home, and we're just trying to track a guitar part.
Yeah.
And so the guy, like I said, he was a conservative Christian guy. I know this is just a funny story, but he would not, he didn't drink, he wouldn't mess with anything like substance wise, but he took Adderall because he thought he was prescribed or something, and he would get dark chocolate. No. So he would take dark chocolate and Adderall, and I'd say, you know what? Let me get my computer set up for you, and you can sit here, and you can work on this rotary guitar sound as long as you want to. I'm going to go home, is what I wound up doing with the guy. And I promise you, on at least 2 or 3 nights, I came back the next morning, he's sitting at the desk, playing with the effects, sounds, and presets in my computer the next morning, and I let him do takes, show him how to do takes. Nothing usable or useful at all, but that's how he chose to spend his nights. I just set him up and let him go.
But sometimes you have to do stuff like that, though. I mean, hopefully he realized that he didn't really like what he did in the end, or maybe you guys had to tell him that. Either way, sometimes you've got that guy in the band and don't realize that you have to sleep. But yeah, you do stuff like that, and then either it works itself out, or you can at least argue with them with a fresh brain. And,
how do you handle telling people bad news, or you aren't good enough to play this part? I mean, do you get that where there's people that are in good bands that are good and they're not good enough to do what they need to do? How do you handle that?
I mean, there's different kind of scenarios, you know. There's the like, well, if the whole band is bad, that's its own thing. I mean, and a lot of times I think it's not so much about a guy being bad. When like kind of what you're saying, like when you've got 2 guitar players and one just like can't match the other guy's parts, or like, you know, he's just not a recording type of guy. And that just happens. I mean, there's guys who like rip live, have awesome live presence. They sound great. You know, they add a lot of other things to the band, but you know, they can't get those mutes right and stops, and like, you know, they can't hear the pitch when they're bending, just random stuff, you know. And when things like that happen, I'm just generally like, hey, you know, your other guitar player could nail this in a heartbeat, and let's just do that and move forward. Like no one's worried about it. No one's gonna, you know, it's not gonna be in the cover or the artwork that, you know, John played guitar instead of Bill on the second chorus of the 3rd song. Like stuff like that doesn't matter, even if it's all the guitars. There's generally a way to bring it up to people. Like, you know, it's just like, what do you want? You want a good record, or do you want to be on the record and have it sound bad? Like, I know this sounds kind of mean, but
no, it does.
I'm generally pretty frank with people, and I don't really waste a lot of time with stuff like that, because after like 14 years, I can see people like that from a mile away. But I also try not to shut people down instantly. Like I never shut people down instantly. It's like, you want to try it out, but I'm gonna keep things rolling. Like I don't want to sit around here and mess around with stuff that's unnecessary.
Absolutely. So your career has been really interesting to me because like the specific timeline of it is interesting, because you've been more and more successful during the time and built up and built your own studio and have hired an engineer, despite the fact that the budgets and everything else are going down, down, down. So that should be flattering to say, but how have you been able to do that when other people are getting out of the business? You're a younger guy overall in the industry. You've been able to come up this way.
Man, I think part of it is I think guys that are getting out of it were living in a world where their budget, their monthly, yearly budget was so much higher that they don't see how it works with a small budget. I mean, when I made my first label records, I was charging like, you know, $1,000 for a month, and I made it work. It was like, you know, it seems insane when I think about it now, but back then I was like, the first record I did that the full record came out on the label, I bought the cheapest laptop possible, and I was like, I made it. Like, this is insane.
What was that record?
And it's never been so high that the spending's been so high that I can't deal with budgets coming down. Honestly, I've just been kind of sitting in the same world of budgets for a long time, but they used to be considered ungodly low, and now they're probably considered on somewhat high, but not high. So
that's a good point.
That's a good point. But part of me having a studio that I own and stuff is the whole point is like, I'm trying to pay everything off low debt. That's all that's all there really is to it, honestly.
So if you go all the way back in your catalog, I was looking at it today on Wikipedia, and I knew I was going to talk to you and stuff like that, and I knew you'd done some of the big records you'd done, and I did a deep dive to the beginning of your Wikipedia page, and I found some stuff that's just crazy closely connected to me that nobody else would know at all. But I'm telling you, my favorite band from the Northwest, that one of the first bands Emery ever played with and saw and thought were like amazing, is Crosstide.
Yes.
I mean,
hell yeah.
Brett and those guys were with
good.
some of the first local shows we ever played as a band. And nobody knows who Crosstide is, but you have down here that you did their record in 2002. I remember that record.
Yeah.
I know that was like one of the bands that we played with when we were a local band in Seattle in 2001 and 2. I remember when they made that. I never put 2 and 2 together of that. And that's the first thing listed on your thing. I'm curious, do you keep in touch with those guys? Have you heard from them since? I haven't heard from them in a decade, probably.
Oh yeah, man. Ryan, their guitar player, and I basically share a birthday. We're good friends for years and years. I keep in touch with their drummer, and I keep in touch with all of them, man.
That's amazing, because they're Portland guys.
Dudes, and they were friends. The thing is that I recorded 4 songs on that album, and I recorded them because I was friends with them, and I did it for free. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, man, these guys are on a label, and they're so good. Why wouldn't I record this? And at the time, I wasn't even charging for recording. I did landscaping for the city of Hillsboro, Oregon at the time.
That's crazy.
And that was actually the stuff that hooked me up with Rise Records.
Mm-hmm.
Got me hooked up with Rise Records, and that was what kind of got the ball rolling.
I forgot that they were with Rise Records. Like, my mind has separated it so much for what Rise is now to what I remember Rise being when it was Anatomy of Ghost and before they were even did anything. I remember we knew an Anatomy of a Ghost back at that time, and Crosstide. Those were just like small bands around. And then I was like, oh, Rise, some little nothing record label was my impression at the time. And then it's crazy to see that. And then you did the Inked in Blood. You remember that record? These are totally obscure references, but that's
digital
just
editing on it. My buddy Stefan actually recorded that album, but I know those dudes.
Yeah.
Awesome dudes.
Oh yeah, you're credited as editing on that, but it's just really weird because you're a Portland guy, and we were a local band in Seattle in 2001 and 2 when we started, and so the connections here are just. I fear before the March of Flames was coming out at the same time, and I know that all that. It was just such a weird thing to look back at that, because that is the actual origin of where I come from. So it's interesting that we don't know each other and haven't talked before.
I know. Well, we never played shows together, which was strange too, because I was playing shows with Crosstide all the time, and not in the band, but the band I was in, and we played like Gatsby's American Dream opened up for us one time, like the first time they played Portland.
Exactly. What was your
Acceptance? All those bands from that scene, and I just somehow we missed it.
Yeah, it was a weird thing because we moved to Seattle to start Emery in 2001, not knowing anything.
Okay.
I mean, we were from South Carolina. Had no idea what we were going into. We moved here because I thought Nirvana was great and the Presidents of the United States and grunge was cool. And we were from a small town in South Carolina, so we got to go somewhere. And we got out here, and it was what was going on at that time largely was like punk and ska. And I was like, well, that's not really what we're into, but it was fast and peppy, and we started playing with these local bands and things like that. And, the screamy and heavy thing was just barely getting going. It wasn't even a thing. And then here we are now.
Weird.
Yeah.
It was weird when it first happened.
It really was weird. I mean, because really it was punk, screamy. I mean, it really was screamo bands playing with ska bands. That's what was happening in Portland. We'd go play in little church basements and come down to Portland. People would come up and playing garages and stuff like that, and it really was screamy stuff happening with just ska or pop punk, really weird stuff from my point of view there. And then now it's so weird that how many years? That's 15 years ago almost now. Now that screamy stuff almost is just nostalgia, old stuff now. Isn't that a weird thing?
Yeah.
Do you think of the genre of screamy and heavy, this Rise Records, the Devil Wears Prada, the Dance Gavin Dance, this all that kind of stuff? Do you think of that as a old or outdated genre, or is it like where you're currently at as far as stuff you care about, like, and listen to?
I think, I mean, I actually honestly don't listen to that much screamy stuff outside of what I work with. I never really have. Like, I enjoy it, but I do stuff like that so much at work that's enough for me. But I do know what you mean. Like, it's weird that it's an old genre. I wouldn't call it outdated. Some of it is, but like, you know, it's like Dance Gavin Dance. Like, how can I call that outdated when I have like a top Billboard record?
That's true.
A month ago, 2 months ago, and it's the bands that are evolving, and there's a lot of like EDM and stuff that's evolving into it. So some of that stuff is definitely not outdated.
Tell me more about that.
You find either. It's not fresh. I mean, it's not brand new. It's weird to me. I think what you're saying, and it's weird to me too, that stuff is like that. There are people who their entire lives of listening to music, that's what they know. And to me, it's still kind of like a new thing, even though it's old.
Well, tell me about what you just said about EDM and being involved there. Tell me what you mean about that. That sounds interesting.
Oh, well, a lot of the screamo, the stuff that was like screamo in the early 2000s, it just got way tighter in the in the 2010s, and then around that same time, all the stuff that had piano and like synths and stuff in it, that genre turned into straight like EDM verses and metalcore choruses. You know what I mean? Like it really evolved.
You trace that all the way back to the
top 40.
You trace that back to the keyboard introduction into the screamo. Is that where? I hadn't thought about it that way,
yeah.
but because when I think of. Sorry,
no, go ahead.
For everybody out there, when you hear podcasters like me interrupt people all the time, it's because there's a little bit of delay on Skype or Google or whatever you're on. So it sounds like often, and I feel embarrassed that like I'm interrupting the person, and I do interrupt people a lot. Is part of the way I am, but sometimes it's just a delay on the computer. So apologize about that. But what I'm saying is, I remember when keyboards were a newer thing. Emery was a early keyboard band, and Under Oath was, and stuff like that. And then it was weird because they weren't that integral in the musical sides of the band. Like, you barely ever hear the keyboards in some of those bands. And as tracks and as computers and technology became more and more usable, those things started integrating into live shows more and more. But at the time, they were like almost a visual prop. I can almost say that for Emery. It was almost a visual prop for us that we had 3 parts that had a keyboard thing. So yeah, we had the keyboard. And then once you had it up there, it was like, wow, that looks cool. And that's like, it was almost ironic, like, oh, a keyboard in a heavy band. And then it became, to the new generation of bands, it became, well, it's a heavy, screamy band. Of course, you need a keyboard, which I always thought was kind of funny. And then maybe you're right. I never traced that, but you trace that technology line all the way into modern EDM and that kind of thing being involved.
Yeah, I think the mindset was like, well, if we're going to have a keyboard player, or like, I think a lot of times it was like, well, we're going to add keyboard to our songs. And then later it turned into, hey, we should have a keyboard player. But, he used to play bass in my buddy's band sort of thing, and he can just play the keyboard live during the backing track. And then that turned into like some guys who were really good at electronic music being like, well, I'll be the keyboard player, but you have to have like legit electronic parts in your songs. That, and there's a few producers I think that really kind of, I don't know if it was like something they required, but they really implemented that in just about every record they did. And I think.
What producers do you mean there?
Also,
who's in your head when you?
Well, I mean, I guess more in like what I'm thinking, like in the scene stuff. Like Joey Sturgis and Cameron Mizell did so much like of their own electronic stuff over other bands' parts that it really like injected that sound into that scene.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost when producers started putting their fingerprints on stuff, almost all the way back to, if you think about Trombino having drum sequencing or something, is what I was thinking of when you said that.
Yeah, exactly. And that Under Oath record was one of the first two where I felt like this band is like a raw, screamy band, but they have they have like legit like electronic drums and synth parts and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Kris, how many records do you do a year? Do you have a rule on that or a way you think about it, like how much you can do in a year, and how long does it take to do a record for you?
Most records, it's 10 songs to 12 is about a month. That's kind of how I lay things out.
Mm-hmm.
I try to do between like 6 and 8 full lengths a year. And I try to space out the times in between with mixing projects or like, development projects that I think are cool. And I try to take some time off too, because like you were saying, you know, we work so much. It's like I try to save, and then I'll take like 3 weeks off and just be with my family and hang out and whatnot. But 6 to 8, that's what I try to do. Doesn't always work out that way, but
that's great. And so, how do you manage your business? Like, you do a lot of. We've talked about Rise Records, but how do you decide what projects you take? Do you have a team, manager, people that do that kind of thing for you? And then ultimately, the question I'm curious about is how do you select or turn down work based on if you like it, if you like the music versus, you know, the money and the financial side of it? How do you weigh all that stuff?
Well, there's definitely kind of a sliding scale there, and a way that I weigh it mentally, I guess. But I like a lot of music. So as long as the band is good and they're writing cool songs, I'm not like super specific on the type of genres I want to work with or stuff like that. But realistically, to answer your first question, I have management, self-titled management, a guy, Johnny Minardi, who kind of filters things out a little bit, but he sends me most stuff and I listen to it. And my first decision, usually like regardless of money, is either like, do I like this band or not? And if I don't like them, I don't think I've ever had a band where I didn't like them, but somehow they had some crazy budget. Like I've never been in that situation. So generally, if I don't really dig it, or I just don't see what is cool about it, I'll just pass on it. I luckily get enough offers that usually I can just choose stuff I like. And then if it's something I like love and there's no money there, I mean, if there's really like no budget at all, most of the time I just have to pass. You know, it's like I got bills to pay and stuff. I run a studio, like I can't do stuff for nothing. But I'll offer to like master their stuff, or you know, mixing a few songs, or just keeping in touch. Like there's some bands I worked with where like I couldn't afford to work with them, but they were so cool. I knew something was going to happen with them. So hey, I know this guy who charges like an eighth of what I charge, but he's really good. Go work with him, keep in touch, you know, talk to these managers, talk to these labels, and let's talk in 3 years. Maybe we can do something awesome together.
So you have no problem turning stuff, like I mean, it's a very fortunate position, but you get to turn stuff down because you don't like it.
Yeah. No, I don't have a problem. I mean, I think I don't ever want to work with bands that don't want to work with me. And I don't know why a band would want to work with me if I don't really dig what they do. Like I don't just want to take money and be sitting here and be like, yeah, that's all right, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like that's not fun for me. No. That's not.
Well, but that's doesn't
do any good for anyone.
Well, but that's where most aspiring producers and engineers are perpetually stuck, though. That's where everybody is.
Well, yeah, and you know what? The other reason I turned stuff down is because I did everything under the freaking sun that came to me for like 10 years. You know,
that's right.
I did it. I did my time, and I got super lucky with a lot of projects, and I'm just lucky to be where I am. If I wasn't, I would work on anything.
So you do think people should take whatever they can get. I'm just
very fortunate to be in this position.
So you do think people coming up should take what they can get? I mean, that's part of paying your dues, then.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think that it's a lot. I think if you're taking whatever you can get and you're like upset about it, or being a downer about it, or not helping the band, but you're also not in a position to turn stuff down, that's also a bad place to be. And I don't feel like I was ever there. Like, you know, when I was doing stuff for years that wasn't my thing, or was like, you know, some like, you know, 50-year-old lawyer band doing covers, whatever. It was fun. That stuff's fun for a certain amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
and you help a band and you do whatever you can to make them the best they are. But at this point in my life, like for now, when I'm living on the expectation of being able to make 6 to 8 really cool records a year that I think are really cool, I just don't want to mix that with stuff that I'm not happy with, and that's just because I'm fortunate enough to be there. Not because I think I'm better than it or anything. It's just better for everybody.
Absolutely. The people that are listening on the podcast and not watching on the video will miss the background that you're sitting in front of right now, but it really is amazing, especially if that's on your property. Is a separate building you built?
Yeah, it is. It's it's a 1,200 square foot building that we built a couple years ago.
That's amazing. 1,200 square feet is huge. So you built the whole studio from scratch.
It was nuts. Yeah.
Foundation up. You designed all
the back
everything.
of our property was raised up. Yeah, I found a half acre in Portland, which was actually super lucky, like a bank owned property, and house was on the front. There was a lot of room in the back. So, and there was already like an apartment built here. So there's an apartment attached to the studio, and it's all separate from the house. And all works out really well.
So what were the important things to you if you were putting together a studio from scratch and building the rooms and the walls and stuff like that? What were the important things to you? And I know 12,000 square feet isn't reasonable for people, for everybody, but what were the things that were your priorities there? Because, I mean, you don't have to have 1,200, I'm sorry, I say 12,000, 1,200 square feet.
That's a big difference.
No, that's a big difference. But you don't even need 1,200 square feet these days to make records, right? Not even at all.
Not at all. But but I wanted this to be like the final studio,
mm-hmm.
Unless I went the lottery or something like this. This is it. So, and I track real drums. Like I don't ever work with MIDI drums for stuff that's supposed to be real drums.
Uh-huh.
And I'm a drummer, so it was really important for me to have a drum room. It's not huge, but a room that has tall ceilings and is a nice size that drums really sound good in. Like
mm-hmm.
room mics are huge for me in my recording process. And I just, I thought about it, and I have been in situations where I tracked in really small rooms and it was fine, but I figured I would just go the full mile and just make this work. But the two things that were really it all work was just tall buildings, very comfortable control room, a drum room that sounded really good, and then building the rooms to dimensions that work really well acoustically instead
mm-hmm.
of trying to fix them after the fact. It was
yes.
like really important to me to build rooms that are acoustically as close to anything you want, and then you just fine tune it. Because man, I've worked in rooms that just there's no saving. And I wasn't going to spend money on something like that. So, but it's just 2 rooms. It's just a drum room and a control room. And that's it. So I kept it pretty simple.
So you're not doing do you have a big console in there, or you don't use a console?
Nah. No, I use a lot of outboard gear,
mm-hmm.
as you can see if you're.
Yeah, you got a lot of outboard gear, but usually with that much outboard gear is sitting right behind a big console for the amount you have there.
Yeah, no, I know. It's all just running live through Pro Tools. I run live inserts and stuff. I have more stuff in front of me, but it's not a real console. It's not like an SSL. It's just more outboard gear. I mean, I'd love to have an SSL, but stuff like that is just it's the other reason that I can afford to do what I'm doing. Like, until I have some crazy budgets that just
mm-hmm.
pay for a console like that and pay for my electrical bill for the next 5 years, I just can't really justify it.
Yeah.
It's cool though. Super.
Yeah, absolutely. But have you've worked on consoles and SSLs and enjoyed that in the past? It's such a weird thing because there's such a thing of the past. Like there's going to be the new generation. Nobody will even know how to use them, right? It seems like that way to me.
Yeah, it's true, man. I mean, I have worked on SSLs, but I've never done like a real mix on an SSL. I've tracked on API boards and Neve boards and stuff, but I've never actually no mix that anyone's ever heard me do was ever done on a console.
Interesting. I think it's an interesting thing because I used some a little bit coming up. Somehow was lucky enough to be around it enough, and then I hadn't used one in years at all. And I went in to do on the Acceptance did a record recently. I went in and engineered some on that, and they rented a studio that had a big SSL console, and I walked in and they were I said, yeah, I'll engineer whatever. And I went in there to do it, and this British guy who owned the studio, which is intimidating when somebody's British anyway, and he started saying all this language and started telling about the console and the converters, and I hadn't been around one in years, and I was like, felt like had no clue what he was talking about, and everything he was saying was going over my head. I was like, well, I'm screwed here. I'm not going to know how to do this at all. And then I sat down and I got on the thing, and it was like, all of a sudden, by the time I sat down and started thinking about it, it just all came back, and I knew how to use this piece of gear, and I was it was such a good feeling, but I was just thinking, it sucks that I even understand this thing because it's so useless, is what I kept feeling like. It's not going to matter, and it sucks that buried in my head, I've spent tons of hours with machinery that is, it's not useless and it's awesome, but it's completely impractical and very unlikely that I'll ever use it in the past. I was super bummed that that's even something that I had spent a lot of time learning at some point.
I could understand that feeling for sure. I've never really thought that way. I'm always more just like, when I sit down in front of a console, it's like it just looks like Pro Tools in my head. I don't know. It's like real life 3D Pro Tools or something.
So how do you feel about Pro Tools and its evolution? Is it a program that frustrates you or one that you just love? Because a lot of people hate with it.
I love it, man. I love Pro Tools. It's come a long way. Mm-hmm. I've been an HD user since 2002. HD.
What was that, 7.3 at that point?
Honestly. What's that?
Well, that was like 7.3 at that point, 2002, or before that, it was 6.
No, man, it was 6. Pro Tools 6, HD was the introduction of 6, and I actually had Pro Tools before that. I started on 5.1, I believe.
Wow.
On like the Digi 001 rig.
Yep. That really ugly Digi 001 thing, really funny. I remember that was 5.
The replaceable face plates. I had like a super cool like green one instead of the terrible aqua blue. I felt pretty sweet.
I recently switched over and started trying to use Logic just as a mental exercise. You ever do that? You ever use Logic?
Nah. Oh yeah, when I'm trying to figure out why people can't bounce their demos down.
Yeah.
Or like send me MIDI. Like people send me MIDI and it comes in like 38 tracks instead of one. That's my limited use of Logic. Problem solving.
It's definitely frustrating because people think, oh, well, you know Pro Tools super well. Can you help me with this GarageBand thing? And I say, no, not at all. You'd be better off to ask any other person in the world. Man. So do you think this career you've got going, how do you envision it going for, like, you just had a kid, you got a 10-month-old. Where would you like to see this go? Like you said winning the lottery earlier, but career lottery, what would it be for you going forward? Would you do less Screamo? Would you do less
7-Eleven? I'm going to go down to 7-Eleven, buy that Powerball ticket as soon as we're done here. But
you got to keep it going.
Aside from that, man, I just want to keep doing what I'm doing, and I'm just going to do my best to stay relevant. Like, I think it's really, really important to be up to date on what's cool in music, what's popular, what tools people are using. I love analog stuff, but I try really hard not to be super stodgy and like, we can't use soft synths because I have this analog synths. Like, I try to keep an open mind, try to keep a positive outlook. And I would also, I've spent a long time kind of honing my engineering and mastering skills, mixing skills, things that, like, if it comes a point where, like, I'm 50 and I'm so freaking out of touch with, I mean, I hope it doesn't, but if I'm so out of touch with music, I still have skill sets that are hopefully applicable, and maybe they won't be.
But when you're 50,
you're old landscaper again or something. But
well, you're 34 now. What do you really picture 54 being? You picture being in the same place, in the same studio, and what other types of music and genres would you want to do?
I'll work with any genres, but I'm not trying to get out of the stuff I do necessarily. And I do all kinds of stuff. I get pigeonholed sometimes as like a metalcore guy, but I've done tons of weird indie experimental stuff and a lot of different prog stuff. But I just want to keep making music. I mean, I would love to keep making music with people in the same age group. I would look at it like that more than I would look at it as like genres. I want to make
Age
music
group.
for that people from the age of like 12, 13 to like 25, the music they love. That's the music that I think is successful and fun to work on, because that's the time in your life when you really like love music and you're emotionally attached to music. It's like, sure, I make records that like 40-year-old guys like sometimes, and I'm 34, but I don't feel, I don't feel music the way I did when I was 15. And I think anybody would be
That's right.
not totally honest if they said they did. And so I want to make music for the age groups that like really love music. And that's what's fun for me.
That's a really,
it's not really about the genre or anything. I want to stay in that.
That's a really interesting point, the way you say it that way, because what you're saying is that it's not silly to say that the people in those impressionable music, it probably has to do something with brain development, honestly, that you attach to music that way at that time of your life. But you're saying that regardless of what the trends turn out to be, you find that will always be the place to be, or the most exciting music to be a part of, even though you don't even know what it'll sound like in 20 years, because we certainly don't. But you still think you'd be making music that the ignorant 17-year-olds are still into, is what you hope to still be. That's a really neat answer to that question.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, I hope so. That's what keeps me feeling young,
Well, I was in a record
store. Tiny little part of me that still feels like an ignorant 17-year-old.
Right. I was in a record store in college one time, in close to the end of the grunge era, whatever it was like that. And it was back when we were looking for used CDs and stuff like that. And I was trying to find just this, whatever music I was into. It was grungy stuff. And then I saw in the record store, there was a guy there, and he was old to me at the time. He must have been 30 something. And he was just wearing a Scorpion shirt, and he had long curly hair, and he was looking for metal records like Scorpions and stuff. And I was like, he was exactly my age at the time that was this, and that's not going to change for him ever. And if I go back and look at it now, I'm still into Pinkerton and In Utero. I mean, that's still what I'm into.
Yes,
that's still where I'm at as a person, and it's never going to change. And I think that's the best music. I think it's the greatest. And I think you're probably right. The trick is, can an older person keep up and recognize what's going to be great about the music coming out of that age group in a decade from now? Will you still be able to maintain, to understand what's good about it? That's the hard part.
I think so, man. I think as long as I think if you're not involved with current music constantly, it's super easy to let it slip away. Like, I even feel sometimes like I'm like a year behind. I'm like, man, how did I let all that stuff slip away? I didn't even ever hear that, And so I can't imagine someone who hasn't really kept up with current music in 4 or 5 years. So I think it's just, like I said, it's super important to stay current and, not get stuck in the past. Like, I'll always have the records that I love the most and are closest to my heart, but there's also records coming out that I still think are awesome. And I think as long as I can continue to stay current, I'll be current in 20 years,
That is a really smart way to look at stuff.
If I'm not, I'm not, and that's life. But I think just staying on top of it is the most important.
Well, but the other thing that strikes me about that, especially being a Portland person, which is the central hub of hipness of the whole probably universe or galaxy, at least.
Yeah.
The opposite of that is the snobby thing, where a hip person is so thumbs their nose at the younger music, or you know what I mean? Like, to embrace what's coming up as the next thing is the opposite of being snobby.
Yeah, absolutely. I lump people like that in with guys who, the last great band was Led Zeppelin, which I love Led Zeppelin. They're great and stuff, but like, you got to realize that music moves on, and that all hipsters are doing are just pretending that they're not that person when they really are.
Let me ask
hipsters that are like.
Let me ask you another question that leaves the music realm a little bit, but I think the same thing is true for simple embracement of technology and how people are going to cope in the future generations. Because it's a principle of mine that when the new technology comes out, and I want to say to myself, or the new social platform, whatever it is, I want to say to myself, that's for the millennials, that's for the kids, that's for this. I'm not doing the Snapchats. I remember when Twitter came out, I thought, that's for girls or young kids or whatever. That's always wrong. And I think, especially if technology keeps increasing and faster, the first people to say, I'm stopping at this point, they're going to be outdated in a way that our grandparents and parents never were, because it's going to be faster and faster than it ever was in the first place. So I think if you don't embrace the coming technologies, maybe similarly to you were talking about music, you risk being left in the dust more than any generation ever in history, as far as I don't know how to keep up with so-and-so. So I wonder, is that are you a tech person?
Drive a car in 20 years if you don't keep up on technology.
That's right.
Like, it's really crazy. And I think that relates to music. Well, I mean, I think it's the exact same thing, but they're also connected. Like, if you're not keeping up on technology, you're not really keeping up on how a lot of music's made. And another thing about, I think what I already said kind of applies to the technology thing. But another thing is, like, if I'm not keeping up with technology, I'm wasting people's time. Like, if you're not keeping up with how records are made and stuff like that. There are certain old school things that I hang on to, but if I find that I'm like wasting people's time, like that's not as important as being inspired and making cool music just to, like, we're not back, I'm not back in the back, like cutting tape with a razor blade. Like, that'd be insane. Like, and things like that are going to keep changing, and I know I need to stay current with that stuff and kind of shut down the part of me that has the nostalgia and know when to implement it and just keep rolling into the future with, keeping current on how things are done.
That is almost poetic. I mean, I wasn't thinking about that at all, and I'm very guilty of not keeping up with new music. Technology is a little easier, but new music's very hard for me to keep up with. But just hearing you say that is like based on my own principle, is almost challenging to me. There's no pride in being an old guy that doesn't keep up with anything, really. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, it's weird. I never made that connection until you said that is at the underlying of the hipster mentality sometimes, is to or at least it's at least snobby to do that.
We all have those thoughts, but when and we all say, I mean, I'm not, dude, I say stuff all the time that I'm like, I wish things were still like this, but you just have, when you say stuff like that, you have to ask yourself, well, why is it not like that anymore? It's like, oh yeah, because life is actually way better now, regardless of this tiny little aspect that I miss how 80s movies looked. I don't want movies to look like that, like, terrible acting and like goofy claymation animation and stuff. Like, that's not how movies should look now. Like, movies are freaking awesome now. I have a great time when I go to movies, but I still love that old stuff. And I find myself, oh man, I wish there was, something like an old freaking Goonies or something. That, there's nothing like that now, but it's like, no, there's freaking Harry Potter and there's all kinds of incredible stuff. So you just got to ask yourself why you're being like that. And come around.
Yeah, I'm nostalgic for the 80s. I'm nostalgic for the 80s too, but I forgot. Yeah, I don't want to forget that you go wait in line for 40 minutes to cash a paycheck, at the bank teller, Yeah,
exactly.
I remember when they came out with the ATMs, I thought, that's interesting. I wonder if that'll catch on, and it's That's
so
interesting.
Now you just take a picture with your phone because it has a camera.
Absolutely.
Of your check, and then you go about your day. I know, it's great.
But nonetheless, you're stacked up right behind you. You've got Marshall 800s. You've got API gear. You've got gears made in the 70s and 80s all behind you there. So how does that jive?
Yep. It doesn't take any longer to record a real amp than it does to record an amp sim. So I'm still using this stuff. I think it sounds incredible. It's awesome. I've got this Friedman, which is pretty new, and that thing is a really cool modern take on old amps. Just a lot of, I don't know, man. Amps are fun. I got more amps in the other room.
Do you use simulations as well?
Just when we're like writing or like messing around with stuff, but not for actually recording.
I think I saw behind you, if you'll move a second again, my favorite piece of gear that I see behind you is that Line 6, the Echo Park rack thing. They don't make that happen in a long time. The thing's unbelievable. I love that piece.
Yeah, that thing's pretty cool, man. I'll get real nerdy for a second. For years, there was this Pro Tools plugin called Echo Farm.
Yes, I know. I love it. Absolutely.
Dude, that plugin is awesome. And
unbelievable.
It doesn't work.
Discontinued.
I have HDX now, and it doesn't work.
Absolutely.
So I bought
absolute
that
favorite
Line 6 because now I have to use analog gear to replicate my digital gear. It's not even analog. I mean, it's digital, but it's out of the box.
Right.
That's a weird thing.
That is a super weird thing.
Analog
I'm
in
the
order
same
to
way.
replicate my outdated digital.
Yeah, I learned to use that actually first, which was still an emulator thing, all of Line 6, but it was all physical. And then they made the Echo Farm, and I thought that was the single greatest emulation and effects plugin I ever had. And then now that's discontinued and not kept up with anywhere. So very, very frustrating. So you have to go back to an analog emulation.
The rights? I'll buy it. I want that plugin. I'll bring it back. I'll make it AAX or something.
Absolutely. When it went to AAX, we lost the Echo Farm. I'm the exact same way. Kris, I've enjoyed talking to you very much, and this has been a great episode. So thank you for your time. What's the next thing you got coming up?
I can't talk about it.
Okay. Well, we'll hear about it when it comes out.
But yeah, man, we'll talk about it once it happens.
Is there anything you want people to do or know or follow you? Do you like people to follow you on Twitter? Just check out your website.
Yeah, Instagram. My Instagram is K Crummett. It's KCRUMMETT. And most of what I do, I update on there. All my other social media is linked.
Well, absolutely. Thank you for your time tonight. Your studio is called Interlace Audio, and it's interlaceaudio.com.
It is, yeah.
So people can find you there. Check out the stuff you've done. I think people really enjoy this episode, and thank you very much. I'm gonna leave you right here.
Sounds good, man. Great talking.
Appreciate it.
Easy.